The morning of my 60th birthday dawned with a quiet, pearly gray light, the kind that promised a soft, gentle day. I was awake before the sun, a habit ingrained after decades of early rises for work, a habit that retirement, now 6 months old, had yet to break. I lay in the stillness of our suburban Ohio home, listening to the familiar, comforting sounds of my wife, Helen, breathing softly beside me. 60. The number felt heavy, significant in a way that other birthdays had not. It was a milestone, a solid, unignorable marker on the road of life. I didn't feel dread, not exactly. It was more a profound, humming sense of reflection, a ledger of my life being tallied up in the quiet of my mind. The day proceeded with a predictable, almost scripted, sweetness. Helen made my favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes with real maple syrup, the smell filling the house with a warmth that momentarily chased away the autumn chill. Our daughter, Sarah, video called from Seattle, her face bright on the tablet screen, her 2 young children waving chubby hands and yelling, "Happy birthday, Grandpa Rob." It was wonderful, it was loving, and yet, a small, unvoiced part of me felt a familiar, old ache. There was a ghost at the feast, a silence where a specific voice should have been. Helen, ever perceptive, squeezed my hand after the call ended. "It's going to be a good day, Rob. I promise." "It already is, honey," I said, and I meant it. But she had a certain glint in her eye, the one she gets when she's orchestrating one of her famous surprises. For my 50th, she'd flown my old college buddies in. I assumed this would be something similar, maybe the guys from the office, or a nostalgic trip somewhere. "Now," she announced, clapping her hands together. "Your first mission, should you choose to accept it, is to get dressed. Something nice. We have reservations for lunch at that new Italian place downtown." I played along, donning a button-down shirt and a pair of slacks that felt a bit more formal than my recent uniform of sweatpants and worn-out flannels. The restaurant was lovely, all exposed brick and the scent of garlic and baking bread. We ate plates of handmade pasta and talked about Sarah, about our plans to visit her for Christmas, about the mundane, beautiful tapestry of our shared life. Throughout the meal, Helen's phone buzzed an unusual number of times. She'd glance at it, type a quick response, and give me a serene smile. "Big day for the stock market?" I joked. "Something like that," she replied, her eyes twinkling. After lunch, she drove us back home, but instead of pulling into our driveway, she parked a few houses down. "Change of plans," she said, her voice laced with a barely contained excitement. "The party starts a little earlier." "Party? Helen, you said we were just having a quiet dinner with the neighbors." I might have fibbed a little. "Come on." She led me up the walkway to our own house. The front door felt different, charged with an unseen energy. I could hear the low murmur of voices from inside. She turned the knob and pushed the door open. Surprise! The sound erupted from what seemed like every corner of our living room. The space was filled with faces I loved, our neighbors, Tom and Barbara, my old fishing buddy, Dave, and his wife, cousins I hadn't seen in a year, friends from my book club. The room was decorated with, over the hill, banners and clusters of black and silver balloons. A massive cake, shaped like a fishing lure, a nod to my favorite hobby, sat proudly on the dining table. I was genuinely surprised. I laughed, hugged everyone, and felt a surge of real joy. This was it. This was Helen's surprise. It was perfect. For the next hour, I was the center of a warm, noisy universe, receiving handshakes and backslaps, listening to toasts and slightly embarrassing stories from my past. I'd completely forgotten the morning's melancholy. It was during a lull in the festivities, as I was refilling my punch cup, that Helen approached me again. Her expression had shifted from festive to something deeper, more serious. "Rob," she said softly, taking my hand. "There's one more thing." "Helen, this is more than enough," I said, gesturing around the room. "This is amazing. You've outdone yourself." "No," she said, her gaze steady. "This is the surprise. The real one. Come with me." A ripple of curiosity went through the room. The chatter died down. People were watching us, and I noticed they weren't looking at me. They were looking at Helen, their expressions a mixture of anticipation and something else, something like shared nervousness. My heart began to beat a little faster. This felt different from a party. She led me away from the main crowd, down the short hallway toward my home office, a small room I used for paying bills and hiding from the television. The door was closed. "Helen, what's in there? Did you get me a new set of golf clubs?" I tried to keep my tone light, but the intensity in her eyes was unnerving. She didn't answer. Instead, she simply opened the door. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of my desk lamp. And there, standing in the middle of the worn Persian rug, was a man. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a posture that was at once familiar and foreign. He turned as we entered, and the light fell on his face. Time stopped. The air left my lungs in a silent rush. My brain, for a terrifying second, refused to process the information my eyes were sending it. It was a face I had seen 1,000 times in my dreams and 1,000 more in my regrets. A face that had been 20 years old the last time I saw it, now etched with the lines and character of a man in his 40s. The same intense blue eyes, the same stubborn set of the jaw, now framed by short cropped hair tinged with gray at the temples. It was my son, Michael, my Michael, the boy I had raised, taught to throw a baseball, to drive a stick shift. The young man I had argued with, screamed at, and who had, in turn, walked out of this house and out of my life 22 years ago over a fight so stupid, so petty in hindsight, that its memory now filled me with shame. A fight about his career choice, his friends, his life, a clash of stubborn wills where neither of us would yield. For 2 decades, there had been nothing. No calls, no letters. In the early years, Helen had tried to bridge the gap, passing along fragments of information she'd gleaned from mutual acquaintances or, later, from sparse social media profiles he never knew she followed. He'd joined the army. He'd been stationed overseas. He'd gotten married. He lived in Colorado. Each piece of news was a treasure and a torture. I was too proud, too steeped in my own righteousness to reach out. I had told myself he knew where we were, that the ball was in his court. But as the years bled into each other, that pride curdled into a deep, constant sorrow, the central regret of my life. And now, he was here. In my office. On my 60th birthday. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were made of wood. I heard a small, choked sound and realized it had come from me. My vision blurred with a hot rush of tears I could no longer hold back. Michael looked just as shaken. His eyes were glistening, and his hands, which hung at his sides, were clenched into tight fists. He looked at me, then at Helen, then back at me. "Hi, Dad," he said, his voice deeper than I remembered, roughened by time and, I imagined, by things I would never know. That simple phrase, those 2 words I hadn't heard in 22 years, shattered the last of my composure. A sob broke from my chest, and I stumbled forward. I didn't know what to do, whether to hug him, to shake his hand, to fall to my knees. He solved the dilemma for me. He closed the distance between us in 2 long strides and wrapped his arms around me. It wasn't a tentative hug, it was a fierce, powerful, all-encompassing embrace. I clung to him, my face buried in the shoulder of his jacket, breathing in a scent that was unfamiliar, leather and cold air, but feeling the solid, real presence of my child. I was weeping openly, without shame, great, heaving sobs that felt like they were tearing a hole in my very being. I felt his body shaking against mine and knew he was crying, too. I don't know how long we stood like that. It could have been a minute, it could have been an hour. The world outside that room, the party, the guests, everything had ceased to exist. There was only this, the weight of his arms, the sound of our shared grief and joy, the monumental, earth-shattering fact of his return. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were wiping our eyes, our breaths coming in ragged hitches. I held him at arm's length, just looking at him, drinking in the details. The tiny scar above his eyebrow from a childhood fall off his bike. The way one ear stuck out just a little more than the other. He was a man, but he was still my boy. "How?" I finally managed to croak, turning to Helen. She was leaning against the doorframe, crying silent, happy tears, her hand pressed over her heart. "It was Michael," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He reached out to me 6 months ago. On Facebook, of all places." I looked back at my son, stunned. He gave a small, hesitant smile. "I got tired, Dad," he said simply. "I was just so tired of being angry. I have a son of my own now. Liam, he's 7. Looking at him, it made me realize how much I'd missed. How much I threw away." He swallowed hard. "I started thinking about what I would do if he ever left me like I left you. It broke my heart. And I finally understood." His words were a lance, piercing straight through the armor I'd built around my heart for 2 decades. I had been a father. He was now a father. And in that shared, sacred understanding, all the old arguments, all the wasted years, crumbled into dust. "Your mother," I stammered. "She never gave up on you." "I know," he said, his gaze full of love and apology for Helen. She was my lifeline. We've been talking for months. Planning this. I flew in this morning. She picked me up from the airport while you were getting your birthday haircut. He almost laughed, a wet, choked sound. I've been hiding in the basement until she gave the signal. The sheer scale of the secret they had kept, the love and patience it must have taken, overwhelmed me. I looked at my wife, this incredible woman who had held our fractured family together with sheer will and hope, and I felt a love for her so profound it was dizzying. I don't know what to say, I whispered, my voice raw. Michael, I am so sorry. Me too, Dad, he said, his own voice breaking. Me too, for all of it. There, in that small, book-lined room, a lifetime of bitterness was washed away. It wasn't a discussion of who was right or wrong. It was a mutual surrender, a white flag raised by two weary soldiers who had finally realized the war was never worth fighting. Helen came over and put her arms around both of us, completing the circle. We stood there, the three of us, holding each other, a family reunited. Eventually, we composed ourselves. Michael pulled out his wallet and showed me pictures of my grandson, a bright-eyed boy with his mother's smile and, I saw with a jolt, my own father's determined chin. He told me about his wife, Chloe, about his work as a contractor in Colorado, about his life. I hung on every word. When we finally emerged from the office, hand in hand, the living room fell completely silent. Every face was turned toward us, and I saw that many of our friends and family were also in tears. They had known, they had all been in on it, holding this impossible secret to give me the greatest gift of my life. The rest of the party was a blur, but a beautiful, radiant blur. It was no longer my birthday party, it was a celebration of a miracle. Michael was swept into a whirlwind of hugs and handshakes. I never left his side. I just watched him, listened to him, my hand on his shoulder, needing the physical proof that he was real. The party lasted long into the evening, but the real celebration was the quiet one that happened after everyone else had gone home. The three of us sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd had so many meals when he was a boy, and we talked. We didn't talk about the past, not the painful parts. We talked about the future. We made plans for them to visit for Christmas, for us to go to Colorado to meet Chloe and Liam. We built a new foundation, right there, on the ruins of the old. Later, as I got ready for bed, emotionally and physically spent, I stood in the bathroom and looked at my reflection. The man in the mirror was 60 years old. His hair was white, his face was lined, and his eyes were tired. But for the first time in a very, very long time, they were also completely at peace. The central ache that had lived in my soul for 22 years was gone, replaced by a profound, humming gratitude. Helen came up behind me and wrapped her arms around my waist, resting her head on my back. "Happy birthday, my love," she whispered. I turned and held her. "You gave me back my son," I said, my voice thick with emotion. How did you keep the faith all these years?" She looked up at me, her own eyes shining. "Because love isn't a feeling, Rob. It's a choice. And I chose, every single day, to believe that our family's story wasn't over. I chose to believe that he would come home." Down the hall, in the guest room, I could hear the soft sounds of my son settling in for the night. The familiar creak of the floorboard, the murmur of his voice as he said goodnight to his wife on the phone. They were the sounds of my life, returned to me. A special guest had arrived on my 60th birthday. But he wasn't a guest. He was a part of me, a piece of my heart that had been missing for far too long. And the surprise, the glorious, life-altering surprise, had indeed left me speechless. But it had also given me back my voice, my joy, and my future. The story wasn't over. It was, in fact, just beginning again.